Welcome, and congratulations on finding your way to this incredible journey through history. If you love ancient civilizations, legendary battles, powerful leaders, and the rise and fall of great empires, make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because this is not just the story of a city. This is the story of Rome. A story that begins with a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River and eventually grows into one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. So sit back, relax, and stay with us, because this journey will take us across centuries of war, ambition, betrayal, political intrigue, legendary heroes, ruthless generals, and extraordinary emperors. And this is only the beginning. Imagine Europe more than 2,000 years ago. There is no Roman Empire. There is no vast network of Roman roads stretching across continents. There are no towering amphitheaters filled with tens of thousands of spectators. There is no emperor whose decisions can change the lives of millions. Instead, there is only a small city. A city built beside a river in the heart of ancient Italy. Its name is Rome. At first, Rome is nothing special. It is surrounded by rival tribes and competing cities. Its people are constantly fighting for survival. But somehow, this small city survives. Then it grows. Then it conquers. And then, it changes the world. The Roman armies will eventually march across Europe. They will conquer lands in North Africa. They will dominate the Mediterranean. They will reach deep into the Middle East. And the laws, languages, architecture, engineering, and political ideas created during the Roman Age will influence civilization for thousands of years. But Rome did not become powerful overnight. Its rise was slow, violent, complicated, and filled with conflict. The story begins with a legend. Two brothers, Romulus and Remus, a mysterious she-wolf, a city waiting to be born, and a deadly struggle between two brothers that would determine the fate of an entire civilization. But the story of Rome is more than mythology. It is a story of war, a story of politics, a story of ambition, a story of betrayal, and above all, a story of power. Today we are going back to the beginning. We will discover how Rome was born, how kings ruled the early city, how the Romans overthrew their monarchy and created a republic, how that republic conquered Italy, how Rome defeated the powerful city of Carthage and became the dominant force in the Mediterranean, how political corruption and social inequality began tearing the Roman Republic apart, how a young and ambitious politician named Julius Caesar rose to power, how Caesar conquered Gaul, how he crossed the Rubicon River and changed Roman history forever, how his assassination plunged Rome into another deadly struggle, and finally, how a young man named Octavian emerged from the chaos, a man who would eventually become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. And with him, the Roman Empire would truly begin. This is the beginning of Rome. In central Italy, a river flows through the landscape, the Tiber. For thousands of years, this river has played an important role in the history of the Italian peninsula. And somewhere along its banks, small settlements began to grow. This was not yet the world of the Roman Empire. There was no single united Italy. Instead, the region was home to many different peoples: Latins, Sabines, Etruscans, and numerous other tribes and communities. Each had its own traditions, its own gods, its own leaders, and its own ambitions. Among these competing communities, one small settlement slowly began to rise: Rome. But the Romans did not believe their city was born like any ordinary city. They believed Rome had a destiny connected to gods, heroes, kings, and ancient legends. And the most famous of these legends is the story of Romulus and Remus. According to Roman tradition, Romulus and Remus were twin brothers. Their mother was Rhea Silvia. Their father, according to legend, was Mars, the Roman god of war. But the twins were born into a dangerous political world. Their lives were threatened, and as infants, they were abandoned. The two babies were placed in a basket and left on the Tiber River. But fate had other plans. The basket eventually came to rest along the riverbank. There, according to legend, the twins were discovered by a she-wolf. The wolf cared for the children and kept them alive. Later, a shepherd found the boys and raised them as his own. As the twins grew older, they eventually discovered the truth about their origins. They were not ordinary children. They were descendants of a royal family. And now they wanted to reclaim their destiny. But the brothers faced a difficult question.
The story of Rome had begun, but the city was still young. It was only the beginning of a journey that would eventually transform the ancient world. In the earliest period of Roman history, Rome was ruled by kings. According to Roman tradition, Romulus was the first king of Rome. After him came a succession of rulers who helped shape the growing city. During this early period, Rome slowly developed into a more organized community. Religious institutions were established. Political traditions began to take shape. Military forces were organized, and the city itself continued to expand. But Rome was not alone. The Italian peninsula was filled with different peoples, different cultures, and competing powers. And among the most influential of these peoples were the Etruscans. The Etruscans lived north of Rome, in a region known as Etruria. They had developed a sophisticated civilization long before Rome became a major power. They were skilled builders, they were experienced traders, they had their own religious traditions, political institutions, and military knowledge, and their influence on early Rome was significant. Many aspects of Roman culture were influenced by the Etruscans. Their architecture, their religious practices, their engineering. Even some of the symbols of Roman political power may have been influenced by them. But Rome's relationship with its neighbors was never simple. Power was always being contested. Cities competed with one another. Tribes fought over land, and kings struggled to expand their influence. Eventually, according to Roman tradition, Rome came under the rule of a powerful and unpopular king. His name was Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. He was remembered as a harsh ruler, a king who relied on fear and force. But one terrible event would eventually bring the Roman monarchy crashing down. According to the traditional Roman story, Tarquin's son, Sextus Tarquinius, became obsessed with a noble Roman woman named Lucretia. Lucretia was known for her virtue and her loyalty to her family. But one night Sextus attacked her. The event shocked Roman society. Lucretia revealed what had happened to her family, and according to the ancient story, she then took her own life. Her death became a symbol of Roman honor, a symbol of resistance against tyranny, and a symbol of the dangers of absolute power. Her family and supporters were furious. They believed the royal family had gone too far. The people of Rome began to turn against the king. Rebellion spread, and eventually the monarchy was overthrown. The king was driven out. The Roman people had had enough. They no longer wanted to live under the rule of a king. Around 509 BC, Rome entered a new era, the era of the Roman Republic. This moment would change everything, because from this point forward, Rome would no longer be ruled by kings. At least, that was the idea. The Romans had seen what could happen when too much power was placed in the hands of one man, so they decided to build a new political system, a system designed to prevent another king from taking control. This new system would become known as the Roman Republic, and it would survive for nearly 500 years. But the Republic would not be peaceful. It would face wars, political struggle, social conflicts, and eventually, the ambitions of men who wanted more power than the Republic could safely give them. The Roman Republic was born from a fear of kings, but centuries later, that same republic would give birth to something even greater, an empire. And the journey from republic to empire was about to begin. The new Roman Republic was built around a simple idea. Power should not belong to one man. Instead, power should be divided. The Romans created a political system in which different institutions would share authority. At the top of the government were two elected officials known as consuls. Two men served at the same time. Each consul had significant authority, but neither was supposed to have complete control. Each could limit the power of the other. The purpose was simple. No single individual should become powerful enough to become a new king. The Romans also had the Senate. The Senate was one of the most important political institutions in Roman history. It was made up primarily of members of Rome's elite families. The Senate advised political leaders. It influenced foreign policy. It played a major role in financial decisions. And over time, its power became enormous. But Roman society was not equal. The people of Rome were divided into different social groups. Two of the most important were the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians belonged to ancient aristocratic families. They had wealth, they had influence, and they controlled much of the political system. The plebeians were ordinary Roman citizens. They could be farmers, workers, merchants, artisans, or soldiers. They were citizens of Rome. But in the early Republic, they did not have the same political influence as the patricians. This created growing tension. The plebeians soon realized something important. Rome needed them. They fought in the Roman army. They worked the land. They supported the economy. Without them, the Republic could not survive. So the plebeians began demanding political rights. Their struggle would last for generations. But slowly, they began to gain influence. They created their own representatives. They gained greater legal protections, and eventually they won access to important political offices. The Republic was changing, but there was another force making Rome more powerful. The Roman military. The Romans were disciplined, they were organized, and they were willing to adapt. When Rome fought an enemy, it studied that enemy. When Rome lost a battle, it learned from the defeat. And when Rome won, it often gained new territory. The Roman army became one of the most effective military forces of the ancient world. But Rome's greatest strength was not simply its soldiers. It was the way Rome treated the people it conquered. Rome did not always destroy its enemies. Instead, it often made alliances. Some defeated communities became Roman allies. Others received limited citizenship. Some were allowed to maintain their own local government. Its name was Carthage, and when Rome and Carthage finally collided, the ancient world would never be the same again. Carthage was one of the greatest powers of the ancient Mediterranean. The city stood on the coast of North Africa, in what is now modern-day Tunisia. Founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers, Carthage had grown into a wealthy and powerful civilization. Its merchants traveled across the Mediterranean. Its ships carried valuable goods from one port to another. Its influence stretched across North Africa, Spain, Sicily, and other parts of the Western Mediterranean. Carthage had wealth, it had trade, it had a powerful navy, and it had experienced military commanders. Rome, meanwhile, was expanding rapidly. The Romans had conquered much of the Italian peninsula. They were becoming stronger every year. But as Rome expanded toward the Mediterranean, its interests began to collide with those of Carthage. At first, the two powers tried to avoid direct conflict. They made agreements, they established treaties, they recognized each other's spheres of influence. But eventually, those agreements were not enough. Both Rome and Carthage wanted influence over the same territories, and one region became especially important: Sicily. The island was strategically located in the center of the Mediterranean. Whoever controlled Sicily could influence trade routes and military movements across the region. Rome wanted it, Carthage wanted it, and eventually the two powers went to war. This became known as the First Punic War. At the beginning of the conflict, Carthage had a major advantage. Its navy was far more powerful than Rome's. The Romans were experienced land warriors, but they had little experience fighting at sea. The Carthaginians had spent generations building ships and mastering naval warfare. For Rome, this was a serious problem. But the Romans had a remarkable ability. They could learn, and they could adapt. According to ancient accounts, the Romans captured an enemy ship and used it as a model to build their own fleet. Soon, Roman shipyards were working day and night. Rome began building warships. But the Romans understood that they were still inexperienced sailors, so they developed new tactics. Instead of trying to defeat Carthage through traditional naval maneuvers, the Romans attempted to turn naval battles into something closer to land combat. They used a device known as the corvus. It was a boarding bridge that could connect a Roman ship to an enemy vessel. Roman soldiers could then cross the bridge and fight the enemy directly. The strategy was effective. Rome was slowly becoming a naval power. The war continued for years. Thousands of soldiers died. Thousands more were captured. Ships were destroyed. Cities were attacked. The Mediterranean became a battlefield. Finally, after more than 20 years of fighting, Rome won. Carthage was forced to surrender. Rome had gained control over Sicily, and something extraordinary had happened. Rome was no longer simply an Italian power. Rome had become a Mediterranean power, but the conflict between Rome and Carthage was not over. The Carthaginians had been defeated, but they were still alive, and they were still dangerous. Decades later, tensions between the two powers began to rise again. This time Carthage had a new weapon, a brilliant military commander. His name was Hannibal Barca. Hannibal was born into a powerful Carthaginian military family. According to tradition, when Hannibal was still a child, his father made him swear an oath of eternal hostility toward Rome. Whether the story is completely accurate or not, one thing is certain: Hannibal became one of Rome's greatest enemies, and he would soon create one of the most extraordinary military campaigns in ancient history. The Second Punic War had begun. Hannibal knew that fighting Rome directly on the Italian peninsula would be extremely difficult. Rome had enormous manpower. It could raise new armies again and again. So Hannibal decided to do something unexpected. He would invade Italy. But there was a problem. Rome controlled the sea, so Hannibal could not simply transport his entire army by ship. Instead, he marched. His army traveled through Spain, then across southern Gaul, and eventually, they reached the Alps. The Alps were one of the greatest natural barriers in Europe. The mountains were enormous, the weather was brutal, the paths were dangerous, and Hannibal was not traveling alone. His army included thousands of soldiers, cavalry, supplies, and according to ancient accounts, war elephants. The idea of elephants crossing the Alps sounds almost impossible, but Hannibal attempted it. His army struggled through the mountains. Many soldiers died. Animals were lost. Supplies disappeared. But somehow, Hannibal survived. He came down from the mountains and entered Italy. Rome was shocked. The enemy had somehow appeared inside Italy itself. And now, Hannibal began destroying Roman armies. The first major Roman defeats came quickly. Roman commanders underestimated him. Hannibal was an expert at reading the battlefield. He understood how to use terrain. He understood how to deceive his enemies. And, most importantly, he understood how Roman commanders thought. At the Battle of Trebia, Hannibal defeated a Roman army. Then came the Battle of Lake Trasimene. Another Roman disaster. Hannibal's army destroyed a large Roman force in an ambush, but the worst was still to come. The Romans gathered one of the largest armies they had ever assembled. They believed that overwhelming Hannibal with numbers would finally destroy him. The two armies met near a town called Cannae. The battlefield was about to witness one of the greatest military victories of the ancient world. Hannibal's army was smaller, but he had a plan. He placed his forces in a carefully designed formation. The center of his army moved forward. The Romans attacked, and slowly, the Carthaginian center began to retreat. The Romans believed they were winning. They pushed forward. More and more Roman soldiers entered the center of the battlefield. But Hannibal was waiting for exactly this moment. His soldiers on the sides began closing in. Then the Carthaginian cavalry attacked from behind. The Roman army was surrounded, completely trapped. The battle became a massacre. Thousands of Roman soldiers were killed. The Roman Republic had suffered one of the greatest military disasters in its history. The news spread across Italy. Rome was terrified. Some Roman allies began abandoning the Republic. For the first time in generations, it seemed possible that Rome might actually lose. Hannibal had done what many believed impossible. He had brought Rome to the edge of destruction. But Rome refused to surrender. And this was perhaps the most important characteristic of the Roman people. They did not give up easily. The Romans understood that Hannibal was almost impossible to defeat in a direct battle, so they changed their strategy. Instead of attacking Hannibal immediately, they avoided him. They attacked his allies, they weakened his support, they continued raising new armies. The strategy was frustrating, slow, and extremely expensive, but it worked. Rome had realized something important. Hannibal could win battles, but he could not easily destroy Rome itself. And while Hannibal remained in Italy, Rome was changing the war. The Roman general Scipio Africanus began attacking Carthaginian territory. He invaded North Africa. Suddenly, Carthage itself was threatened. Hannibal was forced to leave Italy. After years of fighting Roman armies, the greatest Carthaginian general of his generation had to return home. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Zama. There, Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal. Rome had won the Second Punic War. Hannibal had failed. Carthage was defeated. And Rome was now the greatest military power in the Western Mediterranean. The consequences were enormous. Rome's influence expanded, its wealth increased, its armies became more experienced, and its political leaders became more ambitious. But victory came with a price. The wealth flowing into Rome began to change Roman society. Huge amounts of treasure entered the Republic. Thousands upon thousands of prisoners were sold into slavery. Rich Roman families bought enormous estates. These estates were often worked by slaves. Meanwhile, many ordinary Roman farmers struggled to survive. The small farms that had once formed the backbone of Roman society were disappearing. The gap between rich and poor was growing, and the political system was becoming increasingly unstable. Rome had defeated its greatest foreign enemy, but a new enemy was growing inside Rome itself. The Republic was beginning to tear itself apart, and in the decades that followed, the struggle for power would become more violent than ever. Politicians would turn against one another. Generals would raise private armies. Citizens would fight citizens. And eventually, a young Roman aristocrat would rise through this chaos, a man who would become one of the most famous figures in all of history. His name was Julius Caesar. Its name was Carthage. And when Rome and Carthage finally collided, the ancient world would never be the same again. Carthage was one of the greatest powers of the ancient Mediterranean. The city stood on the coast of North Africa, in what is now modern-day Tunisia. Founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers, Carthage had grown into a wealthy and powerful civilization. Its merchants traveled across the Mediterranean. Its ships carried valuable goods from one port to another. Its influence stretched across North Africa, Spain, Sicily, and other parts of the Western Mediterranean. Carthage had wealth, it had trade, it had a powerful navy, and it had experienced military commanders. Rome, meanwhile, was expanding rapidly. The Romans had conquered much of the Italian peninsula. They were becoming stronger every year. But as Rome expanded toward the Mediterranean, its interests began to collide with those of Carthage. At first, the two powers tried to avoid direct conflict. They made agreements, they established treaties, they recognized each other's spheres of influence. But eventually, those agreements were not enough. Both Rome and Carthage wanted influence over the same territories, and one region became especially important: Sicily. The island was strategically located in the center of the Mediterranean. Whoever controlled Sicily could influence trade routes and military movements across the region. Rome wanted it, Carthage wanted it, and eventually, the two powers went to war. This became known as the First Punic War. At the beginning of the conflict, Carthage had a major advantage. Its navy was far more powerful than Rome's. The Romans were experienced land warriors, but they had little experience fighting at sea. The Carthaginians had spent generations building ships and mastering naval warfare. For Rome, this was a serious problem. But the Romans had a remarkable ability. They could learn, and they could adapt. According to ancient accounts, the Romans captured an enemy ship and used it as a model to build their own fleet. Soon, Roman shipyards were working day and night. Rome began building warships, but the Romans understood that they were still inexperienced sailors, so they developed new tactics. Instead of trying to defeat Carthage through traditional naval maneuvers, the Romans attempted to turn naval battles into something closer to land combat. They used a device known as the corvus. It was a boarding bridge that could connect a Roman ship to an enemy vessel. Roman soldiers could then cross the bridge and fight the enemy directly. The strategy was effective. Rome was slowly becoming a naval power. The war continued for years. Thousands of soldiers died. Thousands more were captured. Ships were destroyed. Cities were attacked. The Mediterranean became a battlefield. Finally, after more than 20 years of fighting, Rome won. Carthage was forced to surrender. Rome had gained control over Sicily, and something extraordinary had happened. Rome was no longer simply an Italian power. Rome had become a Mediterranean power. But the conflict between Rome and Carthage was not over. The Carthaginians had been defeated, but they were still alive, and they were still dangerous. Decades later, tensions between the two powers began to rise again. This time, Carthage had a new weapon, a brilliant military commander. His name was Hannibal Barca. Hannibal was born into a powerful Carthaginian military family. According to tradition, when Hannibal was still a child, his father made him swear an oath of eternal hostility toward Rome. Whether the story is completely accurate or not, one thing is certain. Hannibal became one of Rome's greatest enemies, and he would soon create one of the most extraordinary military campaigns in ancient history. The Second Punic War had begun. Hannibal knew that fighting Rome directly on the Italian peninsula would be extremely difficult. Rome had enormous manpower. It could raise new armies again and again. So Hannibal decided to do something unexpected. He would invade Italy. But there was a problem. Rome controlled the sea. So Hannibal could not simply transport his entire army by ship. Instead, he marched. His army traveled through Spain, then across southern Gaul, and eventually, they reached the Alps. The Alps were one of the greatest natural barriers in Europe. The mountains were enormous. The weather was brutal. The paths were dangerous. And Hannibal was not traveling alone. His army included thousands of soldiers, cavalry, supplies, and according to ancient accounts, war elephants. The idea of elephants crossing the Alps sounds almost impossible. But Hannibal attempted it. His army struggled through the mountains. Many soldiers died. Animals were lost. Supplies disappeared. But somehow, Hannibal survived. He came down from the mountains and entered Italy. Rome was shocked. The enemy had somehow appeared inside Italy itself. And now, Hannibal began destroying Roman armies. The first major Roman defeats came quickly. Roman commanders underestimated him. Hannibal was an expert at reading the battlefield. He understood how to use terrain. He understood how to deceive his enemies. And most importantly, he understood how Roman commanders thought. At the Battle of Trebia, Hannibal defeated a Roman army. Then came the Battle of Lake Trasimene, another Roman disaster. Hannibal's army destroyed a large Roman force in an ambush. But the worst was still to come. The Romans gathered one of the largest armies they had ever assembled. They believed that overwhelming Hannibal with numbers would finally destroy him. The two armies met near a town called Cannae. The battlefield was about to witness one of the greatest military victories of the ancient world. Hannibal's army was smaller, but he had a plan. He placed his forces in a carefully designed formation. The center of his army moved forward. The Romans attacked, and slowly, the Carthaginian center began to retreat. The Romans believed they were winning. They pushed forward. More and more Roman soldiers entered the center of the battlefield. But Hannibal was waiting for exactly this moment. His soldiers on the sides began closing in. Then the Carthaginian cavalry attacked from behind. The Roman army was surrounded, completely trapped. The battle became a massacre. Thousands of Roman soldiers were killed. The Roman Republic had suffered one of the greatest military disasters in its history. The news spread across Italy. Rome was terrified. Some Roman allies began abandoning the Republic. For the first time in generations, it seemed possible that Rome might actually lose. Hannibal had done what many believed impossible. He had brought Rome to the edge of destruction. But Rome refused to surrender. And this was perhaps the most important characteristic of the Roman people. They did not give up easily. The Romans understood that Hannibal was almost impossible to defeat in a direct battle. So they changed their strategy. Instead of attacking Hannibal immediately, they avoided him. They attacked his allies. They weakened his support. They continued raising new armies. The strategy was frustrating, slow, and extremely expensive, but it worked. Rome had realized something important. Hannibal could win battles, but he could not easily destroy Rome itself. And while Hannibal remained in Italy, Rome was changing the war. The Roman general Scipio Africanus began attacking Carthaginian territory. He invaded North Africa. Suddenly, Carthage itself was threatened. Hannibal was forced to leave Italy. After years of fighting Roman armies, the greatest Carthaginian general of his generation had to return home. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Zama. There, Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal. Rome had won the Second Punic War. Hannibal had failed. Carthage was defeated, and Rome was now the greatest military power in the Western Mediterranean. The consequences were enormous. Rome's influence expanded, its wealth increased, its armies became more experienced, and its political leaders became more ambitious. But victory came with a price. The wealth flowing into Rome began to change Roman society. Huge amounts of treasure entered the Republic. Thousands upon thousands of prisoners were sold into slavery. Rich Roman families bought enormous. Julius Caesar would begin the military campaigns that would transform him from a Roman politician into one of the most powerful men in the ancient world. The land was known as Gaul. Much of it covered what is now modern France, along with parts of Belgium, Switzerland, and surrounding regions. To the Romans, Gaul was a land of many different tribes. Some were peaceful, others were fierce warriors, and many of them had no desire to live under Roman rule. Caesar saw an opportunity. The Roman Republic had given him military command. Now he had an army, and he needed a reason to use it. Caesar understood something very important about Roman politics. Military victories created political power. A successful general could return to Rome as a hero. He could gain wealth, he could gain influence, and most importantly, he could gain the loyalty of soldiers. So Caesar began his campaigns in Gaul. At first, he claimed that Rome was responding to threats. Some tribes were moving into Roman territory. Others were seeking alliances. Caesar presented himself as a defender of Rome. But the campaigns quickly became something much larger. Rome was expanding, and Caesar was leading the expansion. The fighting was brutal. Roman legions marched through forests and across rivers. They attacked fortified settlements. They fought large tribal armies, and they faced resistance from people who knew the land better than the Romans. But Caesar was an extraordinary commander. He was willing to take risks. He moved quickly. He understood logistics. He knew how to keep his soldiers motivated, and he was extremely skilled at using Roman engineering. Roman soldiers could build roads. They could construct bridges. They could build fortifications. They could create entire military camps in a matter of hours. This gave Caesar an enormous advantage. His army could move quickly, it could defend itself, and it could attack with devastating force. One of the most famous episodes of the Gallic Wars came when Caesar faced a powerful coalition of Gallic tribes. The leader of this resistance was a young warrior named Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix understood that the Gallic tribes could not defeat Rome individually. They needed to unite, and for a time, they did. The Romans suddenly faced a much larger and more organized resistance. Vercingetorix used a strategy that was very different from traditional warfare. Instead of fighting the Romans everywhere, he attempted to deny them resources. Villages were abandoned. Food supplies were destroyed. The goal was to make it difficult for Caesar's army to survive. The strategy created serious problems, but Caesar responded. He pursued Vercingetorix. Eventually, the two forces met at a fortified settlement called Alesia. Vercingetorix and his army were inside. Caesar surrounded the settlement, but then something unexpected happened. A massive Gallic relief army arrived. Now Caesar's army was surrounded. The Romans had enemies inside the fortress, and enemies outside their own defensive lines. For Caesar, this was one of the most dangerous moments of the entire war. But the Roman army held. The battle continued. The fighting was intense, and eventually, the Gallic forces were defeated. Vercingetorix surrendered. The major resistance in Gaul collapsed. Caesar had won. The conquest of Gaul was one of the greatest military achievements of his career. Rome had gained enormous new territories, and Caesar had gained something even more valuable: fame, wealth, and an army that was deeply loyal to him. His soldiers had fought alongside him for years. They had crossed rivers together. They had survived battles together. They had conquered an entire region together. To Caesar's soldiers, he was not simply a politician. He was their commander, their leader. the man who had brought them victory. And Caesar understood exactly how powerful that loyalty could be. But while Caesar was fighting in Gaul, Rome was changing. His old ally Pompey was becoming increasingly powerful. The first triumvirate was beginning to fall apart. Crassus wanted military glory. He eventually launched a campaign against the Parthian Empire. But the campaign ended in disaster. Crassus was killed. His army was destroyed. One of the three great powers of the triumvirate was gone. Now only two remained, Pompey and Caesar, and these two men were no longer friends. Pompey had once been Caesar's ally. There had even been a family connection between them. But political alliances were changing. Caesar's growing popularity frightened Pompey. The Senate also became increasingly concerned about Caesar's power. He had been away from Rome for years. He had a powerful army. He had become enormously wealthy. And now he was returning. The Senate wanted Caesar to give up his military command. They wanted him to return to Rome as a private citizen, without his army. Caesar understood the danger. If he returned alone, his enemies could prosecute him. His political career could be destroyed. Perhaps even his life could be threatened. But if he returned with his army, he would be challenging the authority of the Republic. There was no peaceful middle ground. Caesar had to choose. Give up his army, or risk everything. The situation became more dangerous. The Senate declared that Caesar must obey. Pompey gathered support. Caesar's enemies prepared for confrontation. And then, Caesar made his decision. He would not surrender. Instead, he would march. But before he could reach Rome, he had to cross one particular river, the Rubicon. The river represented the legal boundary between Caesar's province and Italy itself. Roman law forbade a general from entering Italy with his army. If Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his soldiers, he would be committing an act of rebellion. He knew exactly what that meant. Once he crossed, there would be no turning back. According to ancient tradition, Caesar stood before the river and considered the consequences. He knew that his decision would determine his future. It could lead to victory. It could lead to death. It could destroy the Republic. Or it could make him the most powerful man in Rome. Caesar looked at his army. His soldiers were ready. They trusted him. And then he crossed the Rubicon. According to the famous story, Caesar said, "The die is cast." The decision had been made. Civil war had begun. Caesar was now marching against Rome. The Republic was about to enter its darkest chapter. Pompey and his supporters were caught off guard. They had expected Caesar to surrender. Instead, Caesar moved quickly. The city of Rome was no longer safe. Pompey and many of his allies decided to leave Italy. They would gather their forces elsewhere. Caesar entered Rome, but he did not stop there. He pursued Pompey. The two sides fought across the Roman world. Spain, Greece, North Africa. The Mediterranean had become a battlefield. And Caesar's greatest rival was determined to stop him. Eventually, the two armies met at the Battle of Pharsalus. Caesar's forces were outnumbered. Pompey had more soldiers, but Caesar had something else: experience, discipline, and an army that trusted him completely. The battle began, and against the odds, Caesar won. Pompey was defeated. The man who had once been one of the most powerful figures in Rome was now a fugitive. He fled toward Egypt. But Pompey never got the chance to rebuild his power. When he arrived in Egypt, he was assassinated. His enemies believed they were doing Caesar a favor. But they were wrong. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was reportedly presented with Pompey's severed head. Instead of celebrating, Caesar was horrified. Pompey had been his rival, but he had also once been his friend. Now, he was dead. Caesar had won the civil war, but his greatest challenge was still ahead, because Rome was no longer the republic it had once been, and Caesar was no longer. Soon, a conspiracy would begin, and the conspirators would decide that Julius Caesar had to die. But before that final act, Caesar's journey would take him to Egypt, and there, he would meet one of the most famous women in ancient history. Her name was Cleopatra. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, the country was facing its own political crisis. Egypt was ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty. This royal family had descended from one of the generals of Alexander the Great. For generations, they had ruled Egypt, but the dynasty was filled with political rivalries. At the center of the conflict was Cleopatra. She was young, intelligent, highly educated, and extremely ambitious. Cleopatra understood politics. She understood diplomacy, and she understood that Rome was now the most powerful force in the Mediterranean. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, Cleopatra saw an opportunity. She needed Roman support, and Caesar needed stability in Egypt. The two leaders formed an alliance. Their relationship soon became much more personal. Caesar and Cleopatra became lovers, but their relationship was about more than romance. It was also political. Egypt was incredibly wealthy. Its grain was extremely important to the Roman world, and Caesar understood that controlling Egypt's political situation was in Rome's interest. Cleopatra eventually gave birth to a son. His name was Caesarion. She claimed that Caesar was the child's father. Caesar did not officially name Caesarion as his heir, but the relationship between Caesar and Cleopatra became one of the most famous stories of the ancient world. Caesar eventually returned to Rome, and now he was more powerful than ever. His enemies had been defeated. His military victories had made him incredibly wealthy. His soldiers were loyal, and the Roman people admired him. Caesar began introducing reforms. He reorganized government administration. He attempted to reduce corruption. He helped veterans. He settled colonies. He changed the Roman calendar. The calendar reforms he introduced became the foundation of what is known as the Julian calendar. Caesar also expanded citizenship. He wanted to strengthen the Roman state. To his supporters, he was a brilliant leader, a reformer, a military genius, a man who had saved Rome from chaos. But not everyone agreed. Some senators believed Caesar was destroying the Republic. They saw his growing power as a threat. They remembered the history of Rome. The Republic had been created after the Romans overthrew their last king. For centuries, Roman political culture had been built around one central fear. No single man should have absolute power. But Caesar was getting dangerously close. He was appointed dictator, then dictator for life. His supporters celebrated him. Statues were created in his honor. His name appeared on coins. He received extraordinary privileges, and the Senate granted him more and more authority. To Caesar, perhaps these honors were simply recognition of his achievements. But to his enemies, they were warning signs. They believed the Republic was dying, and they feared that Caesar wanted to become king. The Roman people hated the idea of kingship. The memory of Rome's ancient monarchy was still powerful. So a group of senators began planning. They believed that Caesar had to be stopped. Among the conspirators were several important Roman politicians. Two of the most famous were Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Cassius was deeply suspicious of Caesar's power. Brutus was more complicated. He had once been connected to Caesar. Caesar had even shown him mercy after defeating his political enemies. But Brutus also believed deeply in the ideals of the Republic. The conspirators convinced themselves that killing Caesar would save Rome. They believed that if Caesar died, the Republic could be restored. But they did not fully understand what would happen next. The assassination was planned for March 15th. The date became known as the Ides of March. On that day, Caesar went to a meeting of the Senate. According to later stories, Caesar had been warned about danger. Some legends even claim that a fortune teller had told him to beware the Ides of March. Whether these stories are true or not, Caesar entered the Senate. The conspirators surrounded him. Then, the attack began. One senator approached, then another. Suddenly, Caesar was attacked with knives. The famous Roman leader was stabbed repeatedly. He tried to defend himself, but there were too many attackers. Caesar fell, dead. The most powerful man in Rome had been assassinated. The conspirators believed they had saved the Republic, but they had made a terrible mistake. They had removed one man, but they had not solved Rome's problems. The Republic, the age of the Roman Empire, would finally begin. But first, Rome had to witness one final struggle. The struggle between two men, Octavian and Mark Antony. For years, the Roman Republic had been destroyed by civil war. Generals had fought generals. Romans had fought Romans. Cities had been attacked. Families had been divided. And millions of people across the Mediterranean had been affected by the endless struggle for power. Now, the Roman Empire had been born, and under Augustus, Rome was about to enter the beginning of its golden age. But Augustus understood something very important. Winning power was one thing, keeping power was something else. He had watched Julius Caesar rise to enormous power. He had also watched Caesar die at the hands of Roman senators. Augustus had learned from Caesar's mistakes. He knew that the Roman people would never willingly accept a king. The age of Augustus was over, and the age of the Roman emperors had truly begun. In the year 14 AD, Augustus died. He had ruled Rome for more than 4 decades. During his lifetime, he had transformed a broken republic into a powerful empire. Now, the future of that empire depended on one man: Tiberius. Tiberius Claudius Nero was not a young man when he became emperor. He was already an experienced military commander. The age of Augustus was over, and the age of the Roman emperors had truly begun. In the year 14 AD, Augustus died. He had ruled Rome for more than 4 decades. During his lifetime, he had transformed a broken republic into a powerful empire. Now, the future of that empire depended on one man: Tiberius. Tiberius Claudius Nero was not a young man when he became emperor. He was already an experienced military commander that would survive for thousands of years. But before Rome could reach the height of its power, it had to pass through another important period. The Flavian dynasty had restored stability. Vespasian had rebuilt the government. His son Titus had completed the Colosseum, and another emperor, Domitian, had strengthened the empire's borders. But Domitian's rule eventually became controversial. He demanded loyalty. Could the greatest empire in the ancient world survive its own success? The answer would soon become clear. The death of Marcus Aurelius marked the beginning of a new and dangerous era. His son, Commodus, had been assassinated, and after his death, the Roman Empire entered a period of instability. The peaceful succession of emperors was becoming a thing of the past. The Roman army had discovered something dangerous. The age of Constantine was about to begin. The Roman Empire had survived one of the greatest crises in its history, but the empire was still divided. Different emperors controlled different regions, and ambitious generals were constantly fighting for power. One of these generals was a young man named Constantine. Constantine was the son of a Roman emperor. He had grown up surrounded by soldiers. He understood military strategy. The answer would change the history of Europe forever. The Roman Empire was now divided. In the east, the empire was wealthy and powerful. Its capital was Constantinople. The city stood at the crossroads between Europe and Asia. It had strong walls, a powerful economy, and a large population. The Eastern Roman Empire would survive for centuries. But in the West, the situation was very different. The Western Roman Empire was not finished yet. In the year 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire had collapsed, but in the East, the Roman Empire continued. Its capital was Constantinople, a magnificent city located between Europe and Asia. The people who lived there still called themselves Romans. Their emperor was still the Roman emperor. Their laws were still based on Roman tradition, and their government still claimed to represent the Roman Empire. Even after Rome itself had fallen, the Roman story continued. In the year 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire came to an end. The last emperor in the West was removed from power, but far to the east, the Roman Empire was still alive. Its capital was Constantinople, a magnificent city standing between Europe and Asia. The people who lived there still called themselves Romans. Their emperor was still the Roman emperor. Their laws were still based. The Arab armies were preparing to attack Constantinople itself. For the first time, the new Islamic Caliphate set its eyes on the greatest city of the Roman world. If Constantinople fell, the Eastern Roman Empire would likely disappear forever. The Romans knew what was at stake. Emperor Constantine IV ordered every wall to be strengthened. Food was stored inside the city. Soldiers stood ready on the towers. The Roman navy guarded. The struggle for Constantinople had only just begun. Although the Arab siege had failed, the Eastern Roman Empire remained under constant pressure. Its borders were attacked almost every year. Small battles became a part of everyday life, yet the empire refused to surrender. Emperors rebuilt their armies, fortresses were repaired, new soldiers were trained, and Constantinople continued to grow as one of the richest cities in the world. Merchants from Europe, Asia, and Africa filled its markets. Gold flowed into the imperial treasury. For a time, the empire regained its strength, but history never stands still. In the 11th century, a new power appeared in the east. The Seljuk Turks. They were skilled horsemen and fearless warriors, unlike earlier enemies. The Seljuks wanted more than raids. They wanted land, they wanted cities, and they wanted control of Anatolia, the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Roman emperors gathered their armies to stop them. Both sides knew a single battle could change history. In the year 1071, the two armies met near a place called Manzikert. What happened there would become one of the greatest disasters in Roman history. And after that battle, the future of the empire would never be the same. What happened there would become one of the greatest disasters in Roman history. The year was 1071. The Roman Emperor, Romanos IV Diogenes, led a massive army toward Manzikert. He hoped to stop the Seljuk Turks before they could move deeper into Anatolia. Across the battlefield stood Sultan Alp Arslan, a brilliant military commander. Instead of rushing into battle, he waited, he watched, and he allowed the Roman army to make mistakes. As the day went on, confusion spread among the Roman ranks. Some commanders ignored orders, others abandoned the battlefield. Then, the Seljuk cavalry struck. They attacked with incredible speed. Arrows rained down on the Roman soldiers. The Roman army collapsed. Thousands were killed. Thousands more fled. Even the emperor was captured. Although he was later released, the damage had already been done. The defeat at Manzikert changed history. After the battle, Turkish tribes poured into Anatolia. Cities that had been Roman for centuries slowly fell under Turkish control. The empire lost its richest and most important lands. For the first time, the survival of the Eastern Roman Empire was truly in doubt. The emperors realized they could not defeat the Seljuks alone. So they looked west, toward the Christian kingdoms of Europe. They asked for soldiers, they asked for allies. That request would soon lead to one of the most famous military campaigns in history, the Crusades. The Crusades. In 1095, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos asked Western Europe for military assistance. He hoped to receive a small force of experienced soldiers. Instead, Pope Urban II called for a great Christian expedition. Thousands of knights, soldiers, and ordinary people answered the call. Their goal was to travel east, help the Byzantine Empire, and reclaim Jerusalem. This became known as the First Crusade. As the Crusaders marched through Byzantine territory, the emperor welcomed them. But there was also mistrust. The Byzantines and the Western Europeans shared the same Christian faith, yet they spoke different languages, followed different traditions, and viewed each other with suspicion. Still, they agreed to work together. The Crusaders crossed into Anatolia. They defeated several Seljuk armies. One by one, important cities were recovered. The Byzantine Empire regained some lost territory. Then, in 1099, the Crusaders reached Jerusalem. After a difficult siege, they captured the city. The victory was celebrated across Western Europe. New Crusader kingdoms were established in the Holy Land. For a short time, it seemed that Christians had achieved an incredible success. But the alliance between the Crusaders and the Byzantine Empire was beginning to weaken. Arguments over land, power, and leadership created deep divisions. The friendship that had started with hope was slowly turning into rivalry. And in the years ahead, that rivalry would lead to a tragedy no Roman could have imagined. Not an attack by Muslim armies, but an attack by fellow Christians. One of the darkest chapters in the history of Constantinople was about to begin. One of the darkest chapters in the history of Constantinople was about to begin. The year was 1204. The Fourth Crusade had originally been organized to fight Muslim forces in the Holy Land, but politics, money, and ambition changed everything. Instead of sailing to Jerusalem, the Crusaders turned toward Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the East. For the people of Constantinople, the idea was almost impossible to believe. These were not foreign invaders. They were fellow Christians, people who had once promised to defend the empire. But in April 1204, the Crusaders stormed the city. After breaking through its defenses, they poured into the streets. For 3 days, Constantinople was looted. Churches were stripped of their treasures. Ancient libraries were damaged. Priceless works of art disappeared forever. Homes were destroyed, and thousands of innocent people suffered. It became one of the greatest disasters in the history of the Roman Empire. After the sack, the Crusaders created the Latin Empire. The Byzantine Emperor fled. For the first time in centuries, Constantinople was no longer ruled by Romans. Although Byzantine rulers eventually returned and reclaimed the city in 1261. The empire was never the same again. Its wealth was gone. Its army was weaker. Its territory was much smaller. While the Romans struggled to recover, a new power was rising in Anatolia. The Ottoman Turks. They were disciplined, ambitious, and determined to build a mighty empire. Within the next 2 centuries, they would surround Constantinople from every direction. And the final chapter of the Roman Empire would finally begin. And the final chapter of the Roman Empire would finally begin. By the late 13th century, the Byzantine Empire was only a shadow of its former glory. The mighty empire that had once ruled vast lands across Europe, Asia, and Africa had been reduced to a handful of territories. Constantinople still stood proudly behind its massive walls. But beyond those walls, the empire was surrounded by powerful enemies. Its treasury was nearly empty. Its population had declined. Its army was smaller than ever before. The emperors struggled to defend what little remained, while the Romans fought to survive. A new power was quietly rising in northwestern Anatolia. It began as a small frontier state. Few people believed it would become one of history's greatest empires. Its leader was a warrior named Osman. Osman was the son of Ertuğrul, the chief of a small Turkish tribe. Around the year 1299, he declared his independence and founded a new state. His followers became known as the Ottomans, named after Osman himself. At first, the Ottoman state was tiny. It controlled only a few towns and villages near the Byzantine frontier. But Osman had a clear vision. He wanted to expand. His warriors believed they were fighting for both glory and faith. They launched raids against nearby Byzantine lands. Small victories soon became larger ones. More warriors joined Osman. More towns fell under Ottoman control. As the Byzantine Empire grew weaker, the Ottomans grew stronger. When Osman died, his son, Orhan, became the new ruler. Orhan was not only a skilled warrior, he was also an excellent administrator. He organized the government, created a stronger army, and built institutions that would help transform a small frontier state into a real empire. During Orhan's reign, the Ottomans captured the important city of Bursa. It became their first great capital. Mosques were built, markets flourished, scholars arrived, and Bursa quickly became the center of Ottoman power. For the first time, the Byzantines realized they were facing an enemy unlike any before. The Ottomans were patient. They did not rush. Instead, they slowly surrounded Byzantine territories, one fortress after another, one town after another. Each victory made them stronger. Each Roman defeat made Constantinople more isolated. Then, the Ottomans crossed into Europe. This was a turning point. They established permanent control over lands in the Balkans. Many Christian kingdoms tried to stop them, but Ottoman armies continued to advance. Their discipline, their leadership, and their determination made them one of the most effective military forces of the medieval world. Meanwhile, inside Constantinople, the Byzantine emperors watched with growing concern. They knew the danger, but they lacked the soldiers and the money needed to stop it. The empire that had once terrified the world was now fighting simply to survive. And the Ottoman dream was growing larger every year. It was no longer enough to conquer towns and castles. Soon, the Ottoman rulers would set their eyes on the greatest prize of all, Constantinople, the city that had resisted conquerors for nearly 1,000 years. The city protected by legendary walls. The city every ambitious ruler dreamed of possessing. And before long, a young prince would be born. A prince who believed that conquering Constantinople was not just a dream, but his destiny. Prayer and Shay, Part 17.2. Shuru Shbeh Mehmed II Ergenem Shaishba Shiksa Eb Enen Constantinople Jer Prastuti. A prince who believed that conquering Constantinople was not just a dream, but his destiny. In the year 1432, a boy was born in the Ottoman city of Edirne. His name was Mehmed. History would remember him as Mehmed II, or Mehmed the Conqueror. From an early age, he was different from other princes. He studied history, military strategy, mathematics, geography, and several languages including Arabic, Persian, Greek, and Turkish. His teachers often spoke about the Roman Empire. They described Constantinople as the greatest city in the Christian world, a city protected by walls that had defeated countless enemies. Most rulers believed those walls could never be broken, but Mehmed disagreed. He believed that every fortress had a weakness, and one day he would find it. As he grew older, his father, Sultan Murad II, prepared him for leadership. Mehmed learned how to command armies, how to negotiate with rivals, and how to rule an empire. For a short time, he even became sultan while still a teenager, but the responsibility was overwhelming. His father returned to power to stabilize the empire. Instead of feeling defeated, Mehmed used those years to learn. He read about Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and the great Roman emperors. He admired leaders who changed history through bold decisions. Then, in 1451, Murad II died. At just 19 years old, Mehmed became Sultan of the Ottoman Empire once again. This time, no one could replace him. Many European rulers underestimated the young Sultan. They believed he lacked experience. They assumed he would spend years dealing with internal problems. But they were wrong. Mehmed had only one great objective: Constantinople. He knew that as long as the Byzantine capital survived, the Ottomans could never fully control the region. The city stood between Europe and Asia. It controlled vital trade routes, and it remained a powerful symbol of the ancient Roman Empire. Mehmed began preparing in secret. He strengthened his army. He expanded his navy. He recruited skilled engineers from across his empire. Then he ordered the construction of enormous cannons. The largest of them was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Designed by a Hungarian engineer named Urban, the giant bombard could fire massive stone balls capable of shaking even the strongest walls. For centuries, the Theodosian walls had stopped every invader. Now, a weapon powerful enough to challenge them finally existed. At the same time, Mehmed built a new fortress on the European side of the Bosporus. It was called Rumeli Hizara. From this fortress, Ottoman soldiers controlled ships passing through the strait. Constantinople was slowly being isolated. The Byzantine Emperor, Constantine XI, watched these developments with growing concern. He understood exactly what Mehmed was planning. But the empire no longer had the strength it once possessed. The emperor sent urgent messages to the kingdoms of Western Europe. He asked for soldiers, ships, money, anything that could help save the city. Some volunteers answered the call. But no great army came. The defenders of Constantinople would largely stand alone. As winter turned to spring, both sides knew that history was approaching a decisive moment. One empire was fighting for survival, the other was preparing for greatness. Neither ruler intended to surrender, and in the spring of 1453, the largest Ottoman army ever assembled marched toward the walls of Constantinople. The final siege was about to begin. The final siege was about to begin. It was the spring of 1453. For weeks, Ottoman soldiers had been gathering outside Constantinople. From the city walls, the defenders watched thousands of tents appear across the countryside. Day after day, more soldiers arrived, more horses, more cannons, more supplies. By the time the Ottoman army was fully assembled, it was one of the largest forces Europe had ever seen. Leading them was Sultan Mehmed II, only 21 years old, but determined to achieve what generations of rulers had failed to accomplish. Inside Constantinople, the situation was very different. Emperor Constantine XI gathered every soldier he could find. The city's defenders numbered only around 7,000 men. Some were Byzantine soldiers, others were volunteers from Italy and other parts of Europe. Among them was a skilled commander from Genoa, Giovanni Giustiniani. He had come with experienced soldiers to help defend the city. Everyone understood the reality. They were badly outnumbered, yet no one spoke of surrender. The massive Theodosian walls had protected Constantinople for nearly 1,000 years. The defenders trusted those walls, and they trusted one another. On April 6, 1453, the siege officially began. The Ottoman cannons opened fire. The sound echoed across the city. Stone cannonballs crashed into the ancient walls. Dust filled the air. Pieces of stone fell to the ground, but the walls did not collapse. Each night, while the Ottoman army rested, the defenders repaired the damage. Women, monks, merchants, soldiers, everyone worked together. By sunrise, the walls were standing once again. Mehmed quickly realized that defeating Constantinople would not be easy. His giant cannons were powerful, but the Roman determination was even stronger. Every failed assault only increased the determination of both sides. The siege had become more than a battle. It was a contest between two civilizations, one fighting to preserve the last remains of the Roman Empire, the other determined to build a new empire that would dominate the region. Days turned into weeks. The walls continued to shake under constant bombardment, but Constantinople still refused to fall. Then, Mehmed decided to change his strategy. Instead of attacking only from the land, he would strike from the sea as well. But one great obstacle stood in his way: the Golden Horn. The entrance to the harbor was protected by a massive iron chain stretched across the water. No enemy fleet had been able to pass it for centuries. That chain had protected Constantinople. Most commanders would have accepted defeat, but Mehmed was not like most commanders. He began planning something so bold that even his own generals doubted it could be done. A plan that would shock both the defenders and the world. The fate of Constantinople was about to change forever. A plan that would shock both the defenders and the world. The massive iron chain across the Golden Horn had stopped countless enemy fleets. As long as that chain remained in place, Constantinople's harbor was safe. Mehmed knew he could not break it, so he chose a different path, one that no one expected. He ordered his engineers to build a wooden road across the hills north of the city. The path was covered with logs and thick animal fat to reduce friction. Then, under the cover of darkness, Ottoman soldiers began pulling their warships out of the water. Ship after ship, they were dragged uphill by men and oxen. It was an exhausting task, but before sunrise, the impossible had happened. More than 70 Ottoman ships had crossed the land. When morning came, the people of Constantinople looked toward the Golden Horn. What they saw left them speechless. Enemy warships were already inside the harbor. The chain had not been broken. It had been bypassed. Panic spread through the city. The defenders now faced attacks from both land and sea. Emperor Constantine the 11th refused to give up. He gathered his commanders. Every available soldier was sent to strengthen the weakest parts of the walls. Citizens carried stones, wood, and supplies. Priests walked through the streets praying with the people. Church bells echoed across the city. Everyone understood the truth. There would be no rescue. No great army from Western Europe was coming. Constantinople would stand alone. Outside the walls, Mehmed prepared for one final assault. His cannons fired day and night. Each explosion opened new cracks in the ancient defenses. The defenders repaired them as quickly as they could. But exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. Food was becoming scarce. Many soldiers had not slept properly for days. Still, no one abandoned their position. They knew they were defending more than a city. They were defending the last capital of the Roman Empire. Then, near the end of May, Mehmed called his generals together. The decision had been made. The final attack would begin before dawn. Every Ottoman soldier was ordered to prepare for the greatest battle of his life. Inside Constantinople, the defenders spent the night in prayer. Some embraced their families. Others sharpened their swords in silence. Emperor Constantine the 11th walked along the wall one last time. He thanked his soldiers for their courage. He promised to fight beside them until the very end. As darkness covered the city, both armies waited. When the sun rose again, history would change forever.
When the sun rose again, history would change forever. Before dawn on May 29th, 1453, the silence ended. Ottoman drums echoed across the battlefield. War horns filled the air. Then, the final assault began. Wave after wave of Ottoman soldiers charged toward the walls. The first attacks were pushed back. The defenders fought with incredible determination. Arrows filled the sky. Cannons roared. Swords clashed. For hours, the battle showed no sign of ending. Then disaster struck. Giovanni Giustiniani, the experienced Genoese commander who had led much of the city's defense, was seriously wounded. His men carried him away from the walls. When many soldiers saw their commander leaving, their confidence began to collapse. Sultan Mehmed saw the moment. He ordered his elite janissaries forward. They charged through the damaged sections of the wall. The fighting became desperate. Emperor Constantine the 11th refused to flee. Several of his advisors begged him to escape. He refused. According to later accounts, he declared that it was better to die as emperor than to live without his empire. Taking up his sword, he joined the soldiers on the front line. He fought beside ordinary defenders. No royal guard, no safe distance, only a Roman emperor fighting for his city. Soon, the Ottoman forces broke through the defenses. Their banners appeared on the walls of Constantinople. The city gates were opened. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers poured inside. Street by street, the defenders were overwhelmed. Amid the chaos, Constantine XI disappeared into the battle. His body was never identified with certainty. With his death, the line of Roman emperors that had begun more than 15 centuries earlier came to an end. By sunrise, Constantinople belonged to the Ottoman Empire. The city that had survived countless invasions had finally fallen. For Europe, the news was almost impossible to believe. The Roman Empire, founded in the age of Augustus, had finally reached its end. But for Sultan Mehmed II, this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new empire. As his soldiers secured the city, Mehmed rode toward its greatest building, a place that had symbolized Roman power and Christian faith for nearly 1,000 years. The magnificent Hagia Sophia. What happened inside that legendary building would shape the future of the city for centuries to come. What happened inside that legendary building would shape the future of the city for centuries to come. On the morning of May 29th, 1453, Sultan Mehmed II entered Constantinople. The battle was over. The city that had stood for more than 1,000 years had finally fallen. As Ottoman soldiers moved through the streets, many frightened citizens gathered inside the Hagia Sophia. For centuries, it had been the greatest church in the Eastern Roman Empire. Its enormous dome had inspired travelers from across the world. To many Christians, it was one of the holiest places on earth. When Mehmed reached the building, he stepped inside quietly. According to historical accounts, he looked around the magnificent interior with admiration. The city had become his, but he did not want to destroy it. He wanted it to become the capital of his empire. Soon afterward, he ordered that Hagia Sophia be converted into a mosque. Christian symbols were gradually covered, and Islamic prayer was held inside the building. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in the city's long history. Mehmed also gave orders to restore order. The looting that had followed the capture of the city was brought under control. Skilled craftsmen, merchants, scholars, and families from different parts of the Ottoman Empire were encouraged to settle in Constantinople. The young Sultan had a clear vision. He did not want a city of ruins. He wanted the greatest city in the world. Palaces were repaired, markets reopened, roads were rebuilt. New mosques, schools, baths, and public buildings appeared across the city. Slowly, life returned. Constantinople became the capital of the Ottoman Empire. It would remain the center of Ottoman power for centuries. But Mehmed wanted something even greater than victory. He believed he had inherited the legacy of the Roman emperors. He adopted the title Kaiser-i Rum, meaning Caesar of Rome. In his eyes, the Roman Empire had not completely disappeared. Its capital, its lands, and its imperial tradition had simply passed into Ottoman hands. Not everyone accepted that claim. Western Europe rejected it. The rulers of Europe continued to see themselves as the true heirs of Rome. But there was no denying one fact. The empire founded by Augustus and continued by Constantine had finally reached its end. The fall of Constantinople shocked Europe. Many scholars fled westward. They carried with them priceless Greek and Roman manuscripts. Ancient knowledge that had been preserved for centuries inside the Byzantine Empire now spread across Italy and beyond. Historians believe this movement helped fuel the Renaissance, a period that transformed European art, science, philosophy, and learning. In an unexpected way, The fall of one empire helped inspire the birth of a new age. But even though the Roman Empire had fallen, its influence did not disappear. Its laws, its ideas, its language, and its vision of government continued to shape civilizations around the world. Rome was gone, yet Rome was everywhere, and that remarkable legacy is the final chapter of our story. And that remarkable legacy is the final chapter of our story. Empires rise, empires fall, but few leave behind a legacy as powerful as Rome. The Roman Empire ruled for more than 1,000 years. During that time, it transformed the ancient world. Its influence spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Even after the empire disappeared, its ideas refused to die. One of Rome's greatest gifts to civilization was its system of law. Roman law introduced principles that still exist today. The idea that laws should be written, that evidence should matter, and that justice should not depend entirely on the wishes of a ruler. Many modern legal systems still contain ideas first developed by Roman jurists nearly 2,000 years ago. Rome also changed the way governments worked. It created complex systems of administration, professional taxation, public records, and organized citizenship. Many countries still use ideas inspired by Roman government. The Roman language also survived. Latin was once spoken across much of the empire. Although everyday Latin slowly changed over time, it gave birth to entire families of languages. Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Romanian all trace their roots back to Latin. Even English contains thousands of words borrowed directly from Latin. Roman engineers changed the world forever. They built roads that connected continents, bridges that stood for centuries, aqueducts that carried fresh water across great distances. Many Roman structures still stand today, a reminder of the incredible skill of Roman builders. Then there was Christianity. What began as a small religious movement inside the Roman Empire eventually became its official religion. From Rome, Christianity spread across Europe and later around the world. Its influence continues to shape the lives of billions of people today. Rome also left its mark on military strategy. Its disciplined legions became the model for later armies. Its methods of organization, logistics, and engineering are still studied in military academies. Even the symbols of Rome survived: the eagle, the laurel wreath, the senate, the title of emperor. Again and again, later kingdoms and empires tried to connect themselves to Rome, from the Holy Roman Empire to the Russian Tsars to Napoleon. Many rulers dreamed of becoming the next Caesar, but no empire could truly replace Rome. Because Rome was more than a nation, it was an idea that order could replace chaos, that laws could unite millions of people, and that a civilization could leave a legacy far greater than its armies. Today, millions of tourists walk through the ruins of the Roman Forum. They stand inside the Colosseum, they admire the Pantheon, and they visit the ancient walls of Constantinople. These monuments are more than stones. They are reminders of a civilization that shaped human history. The Roman Empire may have fallen in 476, or perhaps in 1453. Historians still debate the date, but everyone agrees on one thing: Rome never truly disappeared. Its ideas live on in our governments, our languages, our architecture, our laws, and even in the calendars we use every day. The story of Rome is not simply the story of an empire. It is the story of humanity's endless desire to build, to conquer, to learn, and to leave something behind that will outlive us. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the rise, glory, and fall of the Roman Empire. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with fellow history lovers. Until our next journey into the past, take care and keep exploring history, because the past is never truly gone.